The morning sun reflected off the glass towers of Neo Seoul, creating a rainbow of colors across the sky. Han-du stood at his workstation in Global Dynamics Corporation, his fingers moving quickly across the holographic display. Numbers and equations floated in the air around him, glowing a soft blue in the early light. At 32 years old, Han was the youngest quantum engineer in the company's research division. His black hair was neatly cut, and his white lab coat was always clean and pressed. Every morning, he arrived at work an hour early, driven by his passion for solving the mysteries of interstellar travel. "Another early start, Han." A voice came from behind him. Han turned to see William Nash, his supervisor, walking into the lab. Nash was tall and thin, with graying hair and cold blue eyes. He always wore expensive suits and carried himself like he owned the building. "Yes, sir," Han replied, keeping his voice polite and professional. "I've made progress on the quantum tunnel calculations. The numbers suggest we could reduce energy consumption by 40%. Nash's face showed no emotion as he looked at Han's work. "Interesting," he said, though his tone suggested it was anything but. "Send me the report by end of day." "And Han." He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Make sure you're not cutting corners. We can't afford mistakes in this department." Han nodded, though inside he felt a familiar frustration. For 2 years, Nash had questioned every calculation, doubted every breakthrough, and delayed every report Han had submitted. Other engineers received praise and promotions for work that wasn't half as innovative as Han's research. Later that morning, Han sat in the company cafeteria with his friend and colleague, Una Park. Steam rose from their coffee cups as they talked in low voices. "You should report him," Una said, her round glasses reflecting the overhead lights. "The way Nash treats you isn't right." Han stirred his coffee slowly. "With what proof?" "He's careful. He never says anything obviously wrong. He just—" Han waved his hand in the air, searching for the right words. "He just makes sure you never get credit for your work." Una finished. "We all see it, Han. You're the brightest engineer in the department, but Nash keeps holding you back." Han's phone buzzed. A message from his girlfriend, Ji-sun, brightened his mood slightly. "Don't forget dinner tonight. Mom's making your favorite soup." Ji-sun always knew how to make him smile, even on the hardest days. That afternoon, Han made an exciting discovery. His latest calculations showed a way to create stable wormholes using half the energy of current methods. This could make interstellar travel possible within his lifetime. His hands shook with excitement as he triple-checked the numbers. Everything was perfect. He rushed to Nash's office, knocking on the door with more force than he intended. "Come in," Nash called out. Han entered, holding his tablet computer. "Sir, I found something incredible. The quantum tunneling effect we've been studying. I solved the energy problem. Look at these equations." Nash took the tablet, his face unreadable as he scrolled through Han's work. Minutes passed in silence. Finally, Nash placed the tablet on his desk and folded his hands. "This is concerning," Nash said. Han blinked. "Concerning. But the numbers. These equations are very similar to Dr. Anderson's research from the Mars Institute," Nash cut in. "Almost identical, in fact." Han felt his stomach drop. "That's impossible. I developed these myself. I've never even seen Dr. Anderson's work." Nash's voice turned cold. "Are you suggesting I'm wrong? I've been reviewing quantum research for longer than you've been alive, Han. I know stolen work when I see it. But I can prove." "I'm sorry, but I have to report this," Nash said, not sounding sorry at all. "Intellectual property theft is a serious offense. Security will escort you out. We'll conduct a full investigation." Han stood frozen as Nash pressed a button on his desk. 2 security guards entered the office. Everything seemed to move in slow motion as they asked for his badge and belongings. Word spread quickly through the building. Han saw people whispering as he was led out, his personal items in a small box. Some looked away. Others stared openly. Una tried to reach him, but the guards kept her back. Outside, the afternoon sun felt too bright. Han sat on a bench across from the building, his mind racing. His phone buzzed again, Ji-sun calling, but he couldn't bring himself to answer. How could he tell her that his career, everything he'd worked for, was crumbling because of a lie? The next few weeks passed in a blur of meetings with lawyers and human resources. Nash presented his evidence, documents showing similarities between Han's work and Dr. Anderson's research. Han tried to explain that great scientists often reached similar conclusions independently, but no one seemed to listen. The final meeting was short. The company's board had reviewed the case and found sufficient evidence of intellectual dishonesty. Han's employment was terminated immediately. His research would be credited to others. His name would be added to a blacklist shared among major technology companies. That evening, Han stood in his small apartment, looking out at the city lights. His phone showed dozens of missed calls from Ji-sun and Yuna. On his computer, news sites were already running stories about the scandal. Rising star engineer caught stealing research. Global Dynamics uncovers major scientific fraud. Quantum research community shocked by plagiarism case. Han's hands clenched into fists as he read the headlines. Every story quoted Nash, painting him as the vigilant supervisor who had caught a dishonest employee. None of them mentioned how Nash had systematically undermined Han's work for years. None of them questioned why a brilliant engineer would suddenly decide to steal research. A knock at the door startled him. Han opened it to find Ji-sun standing there, her eyes full of worry. "I saw the news," she said softly. "I know it's not true." Han felt tears forming in his eyes. Ji-sun stepped forward and hugged him tightly. "We'll fight this," she whispered. "You're not alone." But fighting proved harder than expected. Major companies wouldn't touch him. Research institutions refused his applications. Even small engineering firms turned him away as soon as they searched his name online. Weeks turned into months. Han's savings dwindled. He took a job as a maintenance worker, fixing the same kinds of machines he had once helped design. Every day, he passed gleaming corporate buildings where he used to work, watching scientists and engineers hurry inside with their badges and briefcases. Nash, meanwhile, received a promotion. News articles praised him for maintaining research integrity at Global Dynamics. The company's stock price rose as they announced new breakthroughs in quantum technology, breakthroughs that looked suspiciously similar to Han's original work. One rainy evening, Han sat in a small noodle shop with Ji-sun and Yuna. Steam rose from their bowls as they talked quietly. "I found something interesting," Yuna said, glancing around before continuing. "Dr. Anderson's paper. The one Nash said you copied. It wasn't published until 3 weeks after you submitted your research." Han's noodles stopped halfway to his mouth. "What?" "I've been doing some digging," Yuna continued. "Nash had access to both your work and Dr. Anderson's submissions. He could have easily." "Don't." Han cut her off. "Please, I can't think about that right now." Ji-sun reached for his hand under the table. "You can't give up, Han. The truth will come out eventually." Han looked down at his reflection in the broth. The face looking back seemed older, tired, but something in the eyes remained unbroken. "Maybe," he said quietly. "But for now, I need to find a new path. I can't let Nash take everything from me." As they left the shop, the rain had stopped. The wet streets reflected the city lights like mirrors, creating the illusion of two cities, one reaching up toward the stars and one extending down into the depths. Han looked up at the night sky, barely visible through Neo Sol's eternal glow. Somewhere up there, beyond the clouds and the atmosphere, the mysteries of quantum physics continued to dance among the stars. His equations, his discoveries, his dreams, they were still true, still valid, no matter whose name was on them now. He squeezed Ji-sun's hand as they walked home. Tomorrow would be another day of fixing machines and enduring whispers. But tonight, watching the stars, Han made a silent promise to himself. This would not be the end of his story. Somehow, someday, he would find a way to make things right. Not through revenge, but through something stronger, something that even Nash, with all his power and influence, couldn't twist or steal. He just didn't know what that something was. Not yet. 6 months into his new job as a maintenance worker at the Seoul Justice Complex, Han-do had learned every corner of the massive building. His toolbox rattled as he walked through the marble halls, past judges in their black robes and lawyers carrying thick folders. Sometimes he wondered if any of them noticed him at all. Today's task was fixing the air conditioning in courtroom 7. Han wiped sweat from his forehead as he worked inside the ceiling panel. The summer heat was brutal, and the broken AC didn't help. "You missed a spot." The voice startled Han. He looked down to see an elderly man in judge's robes standing below, pointing at a dusty vent with his cane. "I'm sorry, Your Honor," Han said, quickly moving to clean the vent. "I'll take care of it right away." The judge watched him work with curious eyes. "You're very thorough," he said. "Most maintenance workers don't check the auxiliary cooling lines." Han paused. "The auxiliary lines affect overall system efficiency by 12%. Small details matter." "Indeed they do." The judge smiled. "I'm Judge Kang. And you're not just a maintenance worker, are you?" Han climbed down from the ladder. He considered lying, but something in the old man's eyes made him want to tell the truth. "I used to be a quantum engineer at Global Dynamics." "Ah, the Han-do case." Judge Kang nodded. "I remember reading about it. Quite a mess." Han's shoulders tensed. Here it came, the judgment, the disapproval, the quiet dismissal. But Judge Kang surprised him. "I never believed those accusations," he said simply. "After 40 years on the bench, you develop a sense for when something doesn't add up." Han stared at the judge, not sure how to respond. "Have you eaten lunch?" Judge Kang asked. 20 minutes later, Han found himself sitting in the judge's chambers, sharing a simple meal of rice and soup. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling. The smell of old paper mixed with the steam from their bowls. "The law," Judge Kang said, gesturing at the books around them, "is like your quantum physics. It's all about finding patterns, understanding systems, seeking truth." Han looked at the nearest shelf. The titles were intimidating. Constitutional law, international corporate regulations, ethics in technology. "I wouldn't know where to start," Han admitted. Judge Kang reached for a thin book. "Start here. Basic legal principles. Read it during your lunch breaks. Come talk to me if you have questions." That evening, Han told Ji-sun about his strange day. They sat in their small apartment, sharing a simple dinner of takeout noodles. "A judge gave you a law book?" Ji-sun asked, her eyes bright with interest. "Han, this could be something important." Han looked at the book on their coffee table. "I'm an engineer, not a lawyer." "You're someone who wants justice," Ji-sun said softly. "Maybe this is how you find it." The next few weeks fell into a new pattern. Han would arrive at work early, reading Judge Kang's book before his shift. During lunch, he'd sit in the judge's chambers, asking questions about what he'd read. Judge Kang answered patiently, often telling stories from his own cases to illustrate points of law. "The law isn't just about rules," Judge Kang explained one day. "It's about understanding human nature. Why people do what they do. Why they hurt each other. Why they lie." Han thought about Nash, about the lies that had destroyed his career, and then punishing them. "No," Judge Kang shook his head. "Justice isn't about punishment. It's about restoration, making things right, protecting the truth." Months passed. One book became many. Han's toolbox now carried legal texts alongside his wrenches. During breaks, other maintenance workers would find him in quiet corners, reading about contract law or civil rights. Yuna visited sometimes, bringing news from Global Dynamics. Nash had taken full credit for Han's quantum tunneling breakthrough. The company was making millions from the patents. "Doesn't it make you angry?" Yuna asked one day, sitting with Han, and Ji-sun at their usual noodle shop. Han looked up from his law book. Of course it does, but I'm learning something interesting about anger. What's that? Ji-sun asked. It's more useful when you transform it into something else. Han pointed to a passage in his book. Did you know there are laws specifically about scientific fraud? About corporate accountability? About protecting whistleblowers? Yuna leaned forward. Han, are you thinking of becoming a lawyer? I'm thinking of becoming someone who understands the system, Han replied. Really understands it. 1 year into his maintenance job, Han had read through most of Judge Kang's basic law books. His mind, trained in the precise patterns of quantum physics, found new patterns in legal precedents and procedures. Judge Kang watched his progress with quiet approval. One morning, he handed Han a thick application packet. The bar exam. Han read the cover. Your Honor, I haven't even gone to law school. In 2157, they changed the rules, Judge Kang explained. Anyone can take the bar exam if they can pass the preliminary tests. No law school required. It's about knowledge and understanding, not credentials. Han stared at the application. It would take years of study. You've already started, Judge Kang said. And you have something many lawyers lack. You understand both science and suffering. You know how truth can be twisted, how power can corrupt. That night, Han and Ji-sun sat on their small balcony, looking at the city lights. The application packet lay between them. It's a long road, Han said quietly. Ji-sun took his hand. Longer than becoming a quantum engineer. Han smiled. Maybe not. Then we'll walk it together, she said, like we always have. The next day, Han submitted his application for the preliminary tests. He kept his maintenance job but spent every free moment studying. Judge Kang opened his chambers early, letting Han use the law library before work. Other judges began to notice the maintenance worker who read law books. Some shared their knowledge. Others offered encouragement. A few even gave him old case files to study. Han's life fell into a new rhythm. Wake up at dawn. Study for 2 hours. Work his maintenance shift. Study during lunch. Work until evening. Study until midnight. Ji-sun made sure he ate, made sure he slept, made sure he didn't lose himself in the books. One evening, fixing a broken light in the courthouse lobby, Han overheard 2 lawyers discussing a technology patent case. He noticed mistakes in their technical understanding, but kept quiet. He was learning when to speak and when to listen. Judge Kang watched all this with growing satisfaction. One day, he called Han into his chambers. Tell me, the judge said, why do you want this? Han thought carefully before answering. At first, I wanted justice for myself, to prove Nash wrong, to clear my name. And now? Now I see it's bigger than that. What happened to me? It happens to others. People with power twist the truth. They use complicated systems to hide their lies. Someone needs to understand both sides, the science and the law. Judge Kang nodded slowly. Good answer. Now let's review your practice exam from yesterday. Your analysis of the corporate liability case was interesting, but the lesson continued as the sun set outside, casting long shadows through the book-lined room. Han took careful notes, his engineer's mind mapping each legal principle like equations in a complex formula. Later that night, walking home through the neon-lit streets of Neo-Seoul, Han passed the gleaming tower of Global Dynamics. He saw Nash's office lights still on, high above the city. For the first time in months, Han smiled at the sight. Nash thought he had destroyed a young engineer's career. Instead, he had set something else in motion, something that couldn't be stopped by lies or power or corporate influence. Han looked down at the law book in his hand, then back up at Nash's office. See you in court, he whispered, and continued his walk home, where Ji-sun waited with dinner and more books to read. The path ahead was long, but Han-do was used to long paths. He had spent years unlocking the secrets of quantum physics. Now he would spend years unlocking the secrets of justice. And this time, when he made a breakthrough, no one would be able to steal it from him. The examination room was silent except for the soft tapping of fingers on screens. 300 candidates sat taking the bar exam, but Han noticed none of them. His entire world had shrunk to the questions before him. 4 years of study had led to this moment. 4 years of early mornings and late nights, of legal books and practice tests. Judge Kang had helped him prepare until the very end, drilling him on cases until Han could recite them in his sleep. Question 147. A technology company files a patent for an invention their employee developed at home. Who owns the rights? Han smiled slightly. This was familiar territory. His old life as an engineer merged perfectly with his new legal knowledge. His fingers moved confidently across the screen. 3 weeks later, Han stood in Judge Kang's chambers, holding a tablet with his exam results. Ji-sun and Yuna waited anxiously beside him. "Well?" Judge Kang asked, leaning on his cane. Han looked up, his eyes wide. "I passed." "Of course you passed," Judge Kang said. "But what was your score?" "Highest in the history of the Korean bar," Ji-sun burst out, unable to contain her excitement. "He broke the record." Judge Kang's face broke into a broad smile. "Now that is justice," he said softly. The news spread quickly through the legal community. "Maintenance worker scores highest ever on bar exam," read the headlines. This time, the stories were different from the ones 5 years ago. They talked about hard work, about second chances, about the power of determination. Han's first job offer came from Park & Associates, a small law firm specializing in technology cases. The senior partner, Mrs. Park, had watched Han studying in the courthouse for years. "We need someone who understands both worlds," she told him during the interview. "Someone who can speak the language of science and law." Han accepted the position. His first day as a lawyer, he wore a new suit Ji-sun had helped him choose. Walking into the courthouse as an attorney felt strange after years of carrying a toolbox through the same halls. His first cases were small but important. A young programmer fighting for rights to her code. A research assistant wrongly accused of data theft. A small tech company being bullied by a larger corporation. Han won them all. "You have a way of explaining complex things simply," a client told him after winning their case. "You make the judges understand the technology without confusing them." Word spread. More clients came. Bigger cases. Higher stakes. Han's unique background made him especially good at spotting scientific fraud and corporate deception. He could read research papers as easily as legal documents, finding the hidden flaws that others missed. One evening, a year into his legal career, Han was working late at his office. A news alert popped up on his screen. Global Dynamics announces revolutionary space travel breakthrough. Han clicked the link. There was Nash, standing at a podium, taking credit for new advances in quantum tunneling technology, the same technology Han had developed years ago. Still following the news, Han looked up to see Yuna in his doorway. She still worked at Global Dynamics, keeping him informed about Nash's activities. "Old habits," Han said, closing the news page. "He's getting sloppy," Yuna said, sitting down. "Nash, he started taking shortcuts, pushing too hard for results. Some of us in the lab are worried." Han leaned forward. "What kind of shortcuts?" "The dangerous kind. The kind that could hurt people if something goes wrong." Yuna pulled out a small data drive. "I brought you some files, just in case you're interested." 2 months later, Han stood before the World Court of Technology and Ethics. He was representing 3 whistleblowers from Global Dynamics, researchers who had discovered serious safety violations in the company's quantum tunneling experiments. Nash sat at the defense table with his lawyers, looking older but just as arrogant. He showed no sign of recognizing his former employee and the lawyer now questioning his experts. "Could you explain," Han asked one of Nash's scientists, "how you achieved quantum stability without proper containment protocols?" The scientist stumbled over his answer. Han pressed harder, using his engineering knowledge to expose the flaws in their methods. By the end of the day, Nash's whole defense was falling apart. The case made international news. Han's name became known in legal circles around the world. More whistleblowers came forward, not just from Global Dynamics but from other companies too. Judge Kang watched it all with pride. "You've found your path," he told Han over lunch in his chambers. "You're doing more good here than you ever could have as an engineer." "I learned from the best," Han replied, looking at the old judge with respect. A month later, Han received an unexpected call. The World Court of Technology and Ethics was seeking new judges. His name had been nominated. "They want me to be a judge?" Han asked Ji-sun that night. They sat on their apartment balcony, like they had so many times before, but now they could afford a bigger apartment with a view of the river. "Why not?" Ji-sun said. "You understand justice better than anyone. You've lived both sides of it." Han thought about it. As a judge, he could do more than just win individual cases. He could help shape the laws themselves, make sure they protected truth and innovation, not power and privilege. The nomination process was intense. Han's entire career was examined. His unusual path from engineer to lawyer raised some eyebrows. But his case record spoke for itself. So did his exam scores. And the testimonies from his clients, scientists, engineers, and whistleblowers who praised his understanding of their world. The final interview was with a panel of senior judges. They asked him tough questions about law, ethics, and technology. Han answered thoughtfully, drawing on both his legal knowledge and his scientific background. "Mr. Du," one judge asked, "some would say your past experience with Global Dynamics might bias you against corporations. How do you respond?" Han took a moment before answering. "My experience taught me that justice isn't about being for or against anyone. It's about finding truth. As an engineer, I learned to follow the evidence wherever it leads. As a lawyer, I learned that truth without compassion isn't justice. As a judge, I would use both lessons." The panel was silent for a long moment. Then they nodded. 2 weeks later, Han received the official notification. He had been selected as the newest judge of the World Court of Technology and Ethics. The investiture ceremony was held in the main courthouse. Judge Kang, now retired, helped Han put on his judicial robes for the first time. "How do they feel?" the old judge asked. "Heavy," Han replied honestly. "Good," Judge Kang smiled. "They should be." Ji-sun watched from the front row as Han took his oath of office. Yuna was there too, along with many of his former clients. Even some of his old maintenance worker colleagues came, grinning as they saw their former co-worker raised to the bench. As Han took his seat as a judge for the first time, he caught sight of a news headline on someone's tablet. "Global Dynamics under investigation for safety violations." He allowed himself a small smile. Nash's day of reckoning was coming. But it would come through the proper channels, through evidence and testimony, and the careful application of law. That evening, Han visited his old maintenance office in the courthouse. His toolbox was still there, gathering dust. Inside, he found his first law book, the one Judge Kang had given him years ago. He took it to his new judicial chambers, placing it on his desk beside the latest legal texts and technology journals, a reminder of where he had started and how far he had come. Justice, he had learned, was like quantum physics. It followed its own laws, its own patterns, and sometimes, when you understood those patterns well enough, you could change the very fabric of reality. Han Du had once dreamed of revolutionizing space travel. Now he had the chance to revolutionize something even more important: the way justice worked in a world of rapidly advancing technology. He straightened his robes and opened his first case file. The work was just beginning. 6 months into his role as judge, Han Du sat in his chambers reviewing case files. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioning, the same system he had once fixed as a maintenance worker. A knock at the door interrupted his reading. His assistant entered with an urgent message. A new case had been assigned to his court. Han opened the file and felt his heart skip a beat. Global Dynamics Corporation versus the World Science Safety Board. The defendant, William Nash, Chief Technology Officer. The charges: criminal negligence, endangering human life, illegal human testing. Han sat back in his chair, memories flooding his mind. This was the moment he had both anticipated and dreaded. After all these years, Nash would stand trial in his courtroom. His first instinct was to recuse himself, to pass the case to another judge. But as he read deeper into the file, he understood why it had been assigned to him. The case involved complex quantum physics that few judges could understand. Your Honor. His assistant appeared again. Judge Kang is here to see you. The old judge entered, moving slowly with his cane. Though retired, he still visited Han regularly to offer advice. You've seen the case file? Judge Kang asked, settling into a chair. Han nodded. I should probably step down from this one. Why? Judge Kang's eyes were sharp. Because of your history with Nash. Exactly. People might question my objectivity. Tell me. Judge Kang leaned forward. If this case came before you with different names, different companies, but the same facts, what would you do? Han thought carefully. I would hear it. The technical aspects are too important to pass to someone who might not understand them. Then hear it. Judge Kang said simply. Justice doesn't care about personal history. It cares about truth. The trial began 2 weeks later. The main courtroom was packed with reporters, scientists, and corporate executives. Ji-sun sat in the back row, watching proudly as Han entered in his judicial robes. Nash sat at the defense table, his expensive suit unable to hide how much he had aged. He showed no reaction when he saw who the judge was, but his lawyers exchanged worried glances. Han spoke clearly from the bench. Before we begin, I want to address the obvious. Years ago, I worked under Mr. Nash at Global Dynamics. Those events are public record. If any party objects to my presiding over this case, speak now. Nash's lawyers huddled together, whispering. Finally, they straightened. No objection, Your Honor. Very well. Han's voice was firm. Then let me be clear. This court will follow the evidence wherever it leads. Nothing more, nothing less. The prosecution presented their case first. They showed how Nash had pushed dangerous experiments forward despite safety warnings. How he had tested experimental quantum tunneling technology on human subjects without proper protections or consent. Yuna testified about the safety violations she had witnessed. Other scientists came forward too, describing how Nash had bullied them into silence, threatened their careers, stolen their research. Nash's lawyers tried to paint him as a visionary pushing the boundaries of science, but they couldn't explain away the evidence. Documents showed he had known about the dangers. Videos showed him ignoring safety protocols. On the third day, a former test subject testified from a wheelchair. The failed quantum experiments had left him partially paralyzed. As he spoke, Nash showed no emotion. Han maintained perfect composure throughout the trial, even when Nash's lawyers tried to provoke him by mentioning his dismissal from Global Dynamics. He asked questions when needed, made rulings on objections, and kept the focus on the evidence. During a lunch break, Ji-sun found him in his chambers. You're doing well, she said, bringing him tea. It can't be easy. Han looked out his window at the city skyline. Actually, it is. When I focus on the law, on the evidence, everything else falls away. The trial lasted 2 weeks. Finally, it was time for Han's verdict. The courtroom fell silent as he began to speak. This court has heard extensive testimony about Mr. Nash's actions at Global Dynamics. We have seen evidence of deliberate disregard for human safety in pursuit of corporate profit. We have heard from victims whose lives were forever changed by these actions. Han paused, looking directly at Nash for the first time. Mr. Nash, you held a position of great responsibility. Scientists trusted you to protect their work. Test subjects trusted you with their safety. Society trusted you to advance technology ethically. You betrayed all of these trusts. Nash's face remained stone-like as Han continued. The evidence shows a clear pattern of behavior spanning many years. You suppressed research that wasn't your own. You stole credit for others' discoveries. You silenced those who tried to speak up. And when that wasn't enough, you put human lives at risk. In the back of the courtroom, Judge Kang nodded slowly. This court finds you guilty on all charges, Han declared. You are sentenced to 15 years in prison. Global Dynamics is fined 50 billion won and ordered to establish a fund for the victims of your illegal experiments. As security officers approached Nash, he finally spoke. You're only doing this because of what happened years ago. This is revenge. Han shook his head. No, Mr. Nash. This is justice. The difference is that justice has evidence to support it. The words hung in the air as Nash was led away. Reporters rushed out to file their stories. Victims and their families hugged each other, crying with relief. Later that evening, Han sat in his chambers with Judge Kang, Ji-sun, and Yuna. They shared a quiet meal together, like they had done so many times over the years. I saw Nash's face when you gave the verdict, Yuna said. He finally understood what he created when he tried to destroy you. He created nothing. Judge Kang corrected her. Han chose this path himself. Nash was just the catalyst. Ji-sun squeezed Han's hand. What happens now? Now, Han said thoughtfully, we make sure this doesn't happen again. Over the next few months, Han worked with other judges to establish new guidelines for technology companies. They created stronger protections for scientists and whistleblowers. They set up better systems to verify research and prevent theft of intellectual property. 1 year after Nash's trial, Han stood in a university auditorium, addressing a group of young scientists and law students. The lecture hall was packed. Science and law seem very different, he told them. But they share the same foundation, the search for truth. Whether you're solving equations or arguing cases, your job is to find that truth and protect it. A student raised her hand. But what if the truth is against powerful people? What if they try to stop you? Han smiled, thinking of his long journey from maintenance worker to judge. Then you find another way forward. You study. You work. You transform yourself into something stronger than they expect. After the lecture, Han walked through the university's quantum physics lab. Young researchers worked on advanced equations, dreaming of breakthroughs. He saw his younger self in their eager faces. Back in his chambers, Han found a letter waiting. It was from Nash, written from prison. He opened it slowly, not sure what to expect. Your Honor, the letter began. I've had time to think about what I did to you, to others. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know you proved me wrong about everything. Han placed the letter in his desk drawer. Then he opened his next case file and began to read. Somewhere in these pages was another truth waiting to be found, another wrong waiting to be made right. Outside his window, the sun set over Neo-Seoul. In labs and offices across the city, scientists worked on new discoveries. Some would face challenges like he had. Some would need protection. Some would need justice. And Han-do, the maintenance worker who became a judge, would be ready to help them find it. Not through revenge, but through the patient, powerful force of law. Not through destruction, but through the steady light of truth. Not through power, but through justice. Real justice, at last.